What if everything you thought you knew about success, about stability, about a good life was profoundly wrong? What if the most radical invitation in human history wasn't about gaining more, but about surrendering everything? This isn't a motivational speech about climbing ladders. This is about being called off the ladder entirely. It's about a voice that demands more than your attention, Faye. It demands your very existence. Imagine this: the salty air, the worn nets, the rhythmic pull of the sea. Just another ordinary day on Galilee for James, son of Zebedee. He is a fisherman. His life is predictable, hard, earned, etched into the calluses on his hands. He knows the tides, the fish, the grind. But then a voice cuts through the ordinary. Not a scream, not a whisper, but a sound that seems to contain the very echo of eternity: Jesus. He looks James straight in the eye and says, "Follow me, and I will make you fishers of men." No, let me check my schedule. No, let me weigh the pros and cons. James didn't hesitate. He left the nets. He left the boat. He left his father. He took a step into the profound unknown. Was it madness? To the world, absolutely. To a mind calculating risk versus reward, it was illogical. But for James, it was instinct. It was as if his soul recognized the voice of its creator, and everything else became insignificant. This wasn't just a career change. This wasn't a new hobby. This was an uprooting, a tearing away of every familiar anchor. It was the release of the mundane to launch into the extraordinary. Jesus didn't scout for theologians, for the powerful, for the religiously elite. He called rough fishermen, men with grit, with the smell of the sea on them, with hands scarred by labor, and with an open, willing soul. James was one of the first, and it wasn't an accident. Jesus saw something deeper in him: courage, an untamed passion, a readiness to surrender. This wasn't the start of a new job. It was the genesis of an eternal mission. James wouldn't just catch fish, he would chase souls. He didn't fully grasp the magnitude of it then, but his yes would thunder through history as a leap of faith that shatters all logic. It was courageous. It was irrational. It was everything. So, what are you holding on to today? What nets, what boats, what comforts are keeping you tethered to the ordinary? What is Jesus asking you to release, not for less, but for everything that truly matters? The untamed fire within you, if you think following Jesus means becoming meek, mild, or passive, you haven't truly understood the fire God places within some hearts. You haven't met James. This man was not calm. He was not restrained. He was certainly not moderate. His heart beat like a war drum, and his reactions were as swift and violent as a lightning strike. No wonder Jesus gave him and his brother John a nickname that echoes through centuries: Bonerges, Sons of Thunder. This wasn't a cute, whimsical label. It was a searing insight into their very nature. Jesus saw beyond the explosive temperament. He saw the raw, untamed potential hidden within that intensity. James was the kind of man who would not tolerate injustice quietly. He defended what he believed in with every fiber of his being, tooth and nail. His heart was untamed, perhaps even impulsive, but it was absolutely overflowing with passion. Consider this stark moment. While crossing a Samaritan village, the inhabitants, rooted in generations of prejudice, simply refused to receive Jesus. What was James's response? He was instantly, furiously inflamed. He turned to Jesus, words spitting fire. "Lord, do you want us to command fire to come down from heaven and consume them?" Think about that. He wasn't suggesting. He was asking for permission to unleash divine destruction. This scene reveals the warrior spirit, the all, or nothing intensity that lived in him. There was no neutrality in James. It was always everything or nothing. But Jesus didn't reject his zeal. He didn't tell him to extinguish that fire. He radically redirected it. That thunder within James, it needed to learn to become rain that irrigates parched souls, not lightning that incinerates. It was a lesson in transformation, shifting raw strength into humble service, turning fury into unwavering faith, refining haste into patient endurance. Jesus didn't give up on James because of his extremes. Quite the opposite. He invested in him. He polished each spark of that fiery spirit until it became a guiding light. James didn't transform into a gentle man overnight. He remained firm, decisive, intense, but over time, his strength began to align, not with his own impulses, but with the very heart of Christ. The man who once longed to use fire to punish would now learn to wield fire to love, to preach, to surrender. The nickname Son of Thunder was never a condemnation. It was a prophecy. James would indeed be a thunder, not to strike fear, but to herald a coming storm against darkness. His voice would awaken those spiritually asleep. He would be a profound sound in the heavens of humanity, proclaiming that something divine was unfolding. Is your intensity refined by Christ, or is it still an untamed force? The price of proximity, glory in Gethsemane. We all crave the mountaintop moments, the breakthroughs, the glorious revelations. But are you truly ready for the Gethsemane moments that inevitably come with profound intimacy with God? Because in Jesus' kingdom, the deepest glory is often intertwined with the deepest pain. This is a truth James learned in the most visceral way imaginable. James's transformed intensity, now being polished by the hands of Christ, placed him in an exclusive circle. Jesus didn't treat everyone identically when it came to spiritual intimacy. He loved all, yes, but he chose only 3 Fay Peter, John, and James Fay to witness moments that demanded more than casual faith. They demanded total, absolute surrender of the heart. James began to walk in a sphere of sacred secrets. This wasn't favoritism. It was a recognition of a unique readiness, a profound hunger for something beyond the superficial. Jesus saw in James a spirit capable of enduring glories that might blind others and pains that could utterly crush the unprepared. This privilege began to reshape him. With each revelation Jesus shared with this trio, James plunged deeper into the very essence of the kingdom. It wasn't enough to see miracles from a distance. Now, he heard the secrets of heaven whispered up close. It was as if God had torn open a crack in eternity and allowed James to peer inside. He was there at the most delicate healings. He was there at the most decisive moments. He stood witness when Jairus' daughter was brought back to life. James saw death itself recoil before a simple word from Christ. While the other disciples stayed behind, he entered that silent room and felt the very breath of the impossible happening right before his eyes. He wasn't just a fisherman anymore. He was an eyewitness to life conquering the grave. This proximity, however, carried a profound cost. Seeing more meant carrying more. Hearing more required obeying more. James was being prepared, not just to walk Fay with Fay Jesus, but to bear the very weight of his glory and his coming pain. It was a silent, intense school where every step next to the Master was a living, breathing lesson. His strength was not extinguished, it was finely tuned, like an instrument in the hands of its creator. Without knowing what lay ahead, he followed, eyes open, heart molded, a soul ready to witness what few would ever see. Then came the silent climb. Jesus called him, Peter and John, away from the crowds, up a mountain. They didn't know what awaited them, but James had learned to trust. He climbed with an attentive heart, unaware that the veil between heaven and earth was about to tear. There, in that lonely place, Jesus' appearance transformed. His face blazed like the sun. His clothes shimmered, whiter than light. It was as if his humanity had been swept away, revealing the divine essence always hidden beneath. James fell to his knees, paralyzed. Beside Jesus, Moses and Elijah appeared, conversing like old friends. He was in the heart of it all, not as a casual observer, but as a chosen witness. The vision was so powerful, Peter impulsively tried to capture it with tense. But James, unlike Peter, remained silent, his eyes unblinking, his heart utterly surrendered. Then, from the heart of a cloud, God himself spoke. "This is my beloved Son. Listen to him." All doubt was shattered. The man who had called him from the sea was the Son of the Most High. James would never be the same. Coming down from that mountain of glory was like returning from a place where time ceases to exist. James silently carried the glow of a vision no ordinary eye could comprehend. The glory that had touched his eyes had ignited his soul. The mountain had revealed more than a miracle. It had revealed the destiny of the man who had left everything to follow a voice. Now, that voice was undeniably God's own, but as days turned into weeks, Jesus spoke more and more about suffering, about the cross, about rejection. A stark contrast began to emerge. The weight of glory also brought the crushing challenge of human expectations. That is when it happened. James and John's mother approached Jesus with an audacious request, that her sons sit on his right and left in the kingdom. She didn't see James as a simple disciple. To her, he was special, chosen, worthy of ultimate prominence. She wanted to secure their place at the throne. James was there. He heard every word. Perhaps, even in silence, he agreed. After all, he'd left everything, walked with Jesus, seen miracles, witnessed the glory on the mountain. But Jesus' response was firm, not what they expected. He told them, "You don't know what you are asking." Then, the piercing question, "Are you able to drink the cup that I am about to drink?" The cup of pain, of surrender, of total sacrifice. James, still resonating with the afterglow of the transfiguration, boldly said, "Yes." And Jesus, looking into his eyes, confirmed, "You will indeed drink my cup." The glory they had seen on high now mingled with the omen of blood, the cross, and martyrdom. Their mother's request revealed a deep truth. Even those closest to God can, at times, confuse royalty with privilege. James learned, in that moment, that in Jesus' kingdom, greatness is not found in position, but in profound service. The thrones beside the king are not occupied by those who ask for them, but by those who give themselves without reservation. James began to grasp that following Jesus wasn't a path to earthly honor, but a journey of humiliation that ultimately glorifies. The mountain had revealed glory. The earth would now teach the cross. That cup Jesus mentioned was not an empty metaphor. It began to materialize on a silent, dark night in the Garden of Gethsemane. James was there again, among the three taken closest to the Master. But now, instead of the glorious light of the mountain, there was only the thick shadow of anguish. Jesus staggered under the weight of a pain no human could comprehend. His face didn't shine. It was covered with sweat and blood. James, who had seen the majestic Son of God on the mountain, now faced the broken humanity of that same Son, trembling before the suffering to come. He had said yes to the cup, but he couldn't have imagined he would have to watch his Lord agonize so deeply. Glory had been easy to accept, pain was not. Jesus asked something profoundly simple: "Stay here and watch with me." And James tried. He battled fatigue, fear, confusion. But sleep claimed him, not once, but 3 times. It was as if the weight of the night was too heavy for his eyes, and his heart simply couldn't grasp the enormity of what was about to unfold. The thunder that once raged with fury now slept when called to simply watch. James didn't flee, but he failed. He was present, yet he couldn't sustain the vigil. When Jesus returned for the last time and found them sleeping, there was no fierce rebuke, just profound pain in his voice. "Are you still sleeping and resting? Behold, the hour is at hand." The traitor was already approaching. The garden, once a symbol of communion in Eden, now became the stage for the most agonizing separation in history. And James was there, eyes heavy, heart tight, his soul being torn apart. That cup James had agreed to drink, albeit slowly, began to trickle down the edges of reality. It was the beginning of a path that would demand more than courage. It would demand fidelity to the very end, even with fear, even without strength. James followed. Are you willing to embrace the full scope of following Christ, both the glorious mountain and the agonizing garden? The true power from sword to spirit. Imagine standing ready to fight with every fiber of your being, blade in hand, the adrenaline coursing through you. Then, imagine the one you are fighting for tells you directly to put your weapon away. What kind of power is that? What kind of strength commands surrender in the face of aggression? This is the profound pivot James experienced. It challenges everything we think we know about winning a fight. On that same dark night, in that shadowed garden, the sound of marching feet and clanging weapons shattered the silence. An armed mob approached, torches flickering, chains rattling, led by Judas. James found himself engulfed in chaos, confusion, and raw fear. And there, in the explosive heat of the moment, it was the sword that spoke first. Peter, ever impetuous, drew his blade and viciously severed the ear of the high priest's servant. James, a son of thunder, always quick to react with intense passion, was undoubtedly ready to fight, too. The temptation was overwhelming, to resolve by brute force what couldn't be understood in the spirit. How could someone as powerful as Jesus simply allow himself to be taken? But Jesus stopped everything. He commanded the swords to be put away. He reached out and miraculously healed the wounded man. He surrendered without resistance. It was as if he was declaring unequivocally, "This is not the way." And James, the man who once wanted fire from heaven to consume his enemies, now saw the Master himself surrendering into their hands. There was no glory in that moment, only pain and a chilling silence. In the days that followed, James seemingly vanished. There is no historical record of his great words or deeds during this time. The thunder within him appeared to be utterly silenced. Perhaps he was hiding, paralyzed by fear, dreading being the next target. Perhaps he was wrestling with the crushing shame of not having watched, not having fought, not having understood. His bravado had dissolved. His passion had seemingly failed him. But God's story for James did not end there. Time passed. The cross was raised. The tomb was found empty. And then came Pentecost. The same James who had trembled in the garden, who had succumbed to sleep, was now in the upper room, eyes turned heavenward. And what descended upon him was not a sword, nor fury, nor confusion. It was the Holy Spirit. The very fire he once wanted to unleash upon the Samaritans now burned within him, but with a radically different purpose. It was no longer for destruction. It was for life. It was for light. James was filled with the Spirit. That thunder, that once echoed in impulsive human reactions, now resonated with a divine rhythm. He spoke with breathtaking boldness. He announced the gospel with undeniable power. no longer relying on the strength of his own arm, but on the unshakable authority of heaven. The man who once craved to fight with visible weapons was now a soldier of an invisible kingdom. The sword was left behind. The Spirit took its place, and James, at last, became not merely a disciple, but a living, breathing testament to the profound transformation that only God can accomplish. James, now Spirit-filled, was no longer the man who fell asleep in the garden. Fear had been utterly overcome by an unshakable conviction. Shame had given way to an audacious boldness. The city of Jerusalem, once the stage for the crucifixion, now became the first battlefield of a new kind of war, not with physical weapons, but with words that cut like blades of truth. The apostles rose like unmovable pillars, and James stood among them, firm, decisive, a force to be reckoned with. He was no longer just a follower of Jesus. He was an eyewitness to the resurrection, the one who had seen the transfigured Christ on the mountain and bleeding in Gethsemane, now proclaimed him as the living, glorified, invincible Lord. Where do you seek your power? In your own strength, your own strategies, your own visible weapons, or in the transformative, empowering presence of the Holy Spirit, which refines your fire and gives you an authority that the world cannot comprehend? The undeniable witness, your life as a legacy. You don't need a famous name. You don't need a best-selling book. You don't need to found a global ministry to shake the world. Your life, fully surrendered to Christ, can become an undeniable, unshakable testimony that echoes through generations. James proves this truth with every beat of his transformed heart. Jerusalem was seething. Thousands poured in from every corner of the world for the festivals, and the disciples, once fearful and hidden, now spoke with power and crystal clarity in the very streets where their master had been crucified. The authorities, utterly bewildered, didn't know how to contain them. James, with his strong voice and compelling presence, became an immovable stone, impossible to ignore. He no longer sought a place of prominence for himself. He fiercely sought souls, that old impulse for personal greatness. It was now radically redirected, consumed by the relentless pursuit of God's kingdom. The disciples shared everything. They preached in the bustling streets. They prayed in humble homes. They healed the sick. They faced down terrifying threats. And James, with his unwavering firmness, emerged as one of the central, unyielding pillars of this burgeoning new community. He didn't chase visibility. His absolute fidelity made him visible. His leadership wasn't forged through eloquent speeches. It was hammered out in daily radical surrender. Alongside Peter and John, James boldly faced the Sanhedrin, those same powerful men who had condemned his master, and he didn't back down. That thunder now carried a voice of mercy, yes, but also an undeniable authority. The same spirit that had descended in the upper room now overflowed into the public squares. Every single word James spoke was infused with memory. From the humble fishing boat to the glorious mountain, from the agonizing garden to the miraculous empty tomb. Every experience was etched onto his very soul. He didn't just announce theories, he proclaimed what he had seen, what he had touched, what he had lived. His very life was a living letter, a palpable manifestation of the gospel. Jerusalem was no longer an end for James. It was a defiant beginning. He understood that the kingdom was not established by thrones, but by courageous witnesses. And he was one of them, standing firm until his very last breath. James's presence in Jerusalem grew like an echo that could not be silenced. Each of his words carried the raw, undeniable truth of someone who had seen and lived the gospel from its absolute inception. But the more he spoke, the more he disturbed the established order. The same heart that once desired a place of honor next to the throne now beat with an unshakable courage before the very sword of the empire. Herod Agrippa, cunning and eager to appease the religious leaders and consolidate his political power, saw a potent opportunity in the persecution of these burgeoning Christians. The church was growing too rapidly. Its leaders were beginning to reshape the city with compassion, with miracles, and with an authority that didn't stem from titles, but directly from the Spirit. It was crucial, in Herod's view, to sever the root of this influence. James was chosen as the first. This decision was no random act. He was a voice. He was a pillar. He was a living, breathing memory of Christ himself. Killing James would be an attempt to erase the very foundations of this new faith. Herod had him arrested. There was no fair trial, no room for defense, just the chilling, cold sentence, death by sword. We have no long, detailed accounts of his final moments. But from everything we know of his journey, we can vividly imagine James facing that blade with the same unyielding firmness he displayed when confronting the Sanhedrin. There was no escape. There was no denial. He knew, deep in his soul, that drinking from the cup also meant this outcome. And there, in that dark cell, his soul was already at peace. The blade that awaited him was not the end. It was simply the profound conclusion of a path that had begun all those years ago when he left his nets to follow a voice. The same voice that had called him by the sea now led him to the very gates of eternity. The glory of the mountain, the agonizing weight of the garden, the purifying fire of the Spirit, everything had meticulously prepared James for that ultimate moment. When the blow was struck, Jerusalem lost a man, but heaven gained a martyr. James became the very first apostle to shed his blood because of Christ. The thunder at last fell silent on earth, but its profound sound would continue to echo for generations. It wasn't a defeat, it was a seed. James's death didn't erase his story. On the contrary, it sealed it with the strongest, most indelible ink, his own blood. His blood touched the ground of Jerusalem like a life-giving seed. His body fell by Herod's sword, but his life didn't end there. The silence after his death was not the end of his voice, but the vibrant beginning of a legacy that would grow like thunder in the hearts of all who heard his story. The disciples who remained didn't falter, they strengthened themselves. James's courage didn't generate fear. It ignited faith. The one who left everything on the shores of the sea, who climbed the mountain of glory, who slept in Gethsemane, who was filled with the Spirit, and who faced death without flinching, had left an example impossible to ignore. His martyrdom confirmed that the cross was, indeed, the only way. There was no throne without sacrifice, no kingdom without rejection. James was the first of the apostles to shed blood, but he certainly wouldn't be the last. His death opened a trail where countless others would follow, not in a search for suffering, but acutely aware that living for Christ means being willing to die for him. The church didn't stop with his absence. It grew, it expanded. It gained unimaginable strength, and wherever the message of Jesus was announced, there was someone telling the story of James. He became a timeless symbol of fidelity to the very end. Not because of spectacular deeds that he wrote down, but because he remained, because he said yes, because he didn't back down when the cost became unbelievably high. Many years later, persecuted Christians would whisper his name in prisons, in hidden catacombs, and before blazing bonfires. James's name was a living reminder that it is always, eternally worth it. He didn't write letters. He didn't found churches that bear his name. He didn't deliver grand, recorded speeches. But his life spoke louder than any words. Tode, the profound sound of the thunder that once echoed on the shores of Galilee, can still be heard, not in the heavens, but within the hearts of those who live with the same radical surrender. James wasn't perfect. He was intense. He was impatient. He was flawed, but he was whole. And God always honors those who give themselves completely. His legacy is not only etched in the history of the Church, it is forever engraved in the very heart of the gospel. Following Jesus, whatever the cost. So, what kind of echo will your life leave behind? Will you be an undeniable witness?